We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio and our special Talking Liberty segment. Now, once again, we are back with Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, host of the excellent Uprising podcast. More excellent this last week than ever before, in my opinion, Mr. Scott DeCosenza, Esquire. Welcome back, Scott.
Thank you, Mark. It's good to be back.
President Joe Biden, in the wake of the Supreme Court striking down affirmative action, he was asked, is this a rogue court, by a reporter that was clearly being impartial and biased towards the decision by the justices in the court? And he responded, it's not a normal court. Is he right or wrong?
Well, let's unpack that for just a second, if we could first.
My introduction or the reporter or Biden's response?
Talk about the events in the Roosevelt room, as it were, after the announcement of students.
The Roosevelt room, not that there was no cocaine found in the Roosevelt room. Is that correct? Or that we're aware of?
You know, I have to check back in with the details on that story. I heard West Wing, but I didn't hear.
I heard library.
Yeah, well, in any case, the reporter shouted out that the NAACP said that this decision called into question the legitimacy of the court, and then offered or asked whether it was a rogue court. But I just thought it was so funny how, we're always talking about, or we're always hearing about how, the good press is to not comfort the powerful, but to comfort the afflicted, right? And to challenge and bring, what about the Asian kids who are now no longer going to be subject to horrible anti-Asian discrimination, even if you didn't care about the whites, which, by the way, let's be clear, Asians and whites are both victimized by the affirmative action practices. They're both discriminated against because of the color of their skin and their race, and for no other reason. So, but I'll just take it as a given that that's not an acceptable.
Well, they're not the popular minority at present, I guess.
Yeah, I'll just take it as a given that sympathy for racial discrimination against whites is not a thing there.
Sure,
but you'd think that especially for Asian families that are socioeconomically disadvantaged, as well as being recent immigrants, maybe challenged by language and some other things, maybe you could ask the president, is he at least happy that those kids will now get a fair shake at Harvard or at UNC, given what's been revealed with the Supreme Court's case here, that the data shows that one of the most important factors in an admission decision might be the race of the applicant. It's not some mere plus factor. It is everything in a lot of cases. So, but I'll just leave that aside. That's the where mainstream reporting is in 2023, sad to say. So
to answer my question, is it a normal court?
Well, it's just an insult line. It's just Joe Biden saying it's not normal. He wants to say that it's a rogue court politically, right? That would benefit him with his kind of progressive base. But because he's actually the leader of this country, he can't be quite as explicit as that, I think, and say it. And of course, there's no basis in any rational kind of thought process, though people would say, oh, yes, there's reason to suggest it may be a rogue court. There's nothing approximating it. Rogue courts, in their most common usage, would be they're going out and looking for cases to change our laws. They're taking cases and using those cases to change the law in matters that aren't really controversies before them. Those are the sorts of things that we might think of willy-nilly, reversing precedents. Now, the precedent that was reversed in the affirmative action case, namely the Bakke case and its legacy cases, the court has been wrestling with affirmative action for a long time with these cases, and it's not like they were like, oh, it's one direction only for more affirmative action, and all of a sudden we've seen like a whiplash where not only do they not pare it back, but dial it way back. That's the opposite of what happened. What we saw was the court granting this limited sort of wink and a nod, we're going to let you discriminate on the basis of race, and then wrestle with it because it's contrary to all the other case law and the statutory authority, and then finally coming around and saying, we can't abide this this preposterous sort of notion anymore that what you're not doing is just discriminating on the basis of race.
Because Joe Biden said that this court is not normal, what we've seen in the media is an almost full court press to say how delegitimate or illegitimate, sorry, the court is. And I thought one of the most egregious ones was from Mehdi Hassan. So he tried to make the case that you've got a court, and what it's doing is Congress passes this legislation, and then the courts passing its own type of legislation, shutting it down, overturning it. And he seemed to fail to realize that the courts, the saying, you had one job. The court's one job is to determine whether the legislation is constitutional or not. They're essentially a legal lens, aren't they? And in that way, their interpretation can't be considered abnormal because it's supposed to be just reflecting what does this legislation adhere to the Constitution.
What I think you're having trouble with, Mark, is trying to make sense of a political argument to a legal decision, a political objection to a legal decision that is crafted not to reply to the legal objection to it, but for political purposes. I watched Joe Biden talk about how many people, one of the first the press conference I saw in response to the student loan debt relief decision, which ruled that it was not a constitutional arrangement and would have to be canceled with the way they were planning on doing it. The Secretary of Education talked about how awful a decision it was because of how many people it would have helped. Well, the Supreme Court doesn't start or finish or anywhere in the middle with, this is going to help a lot of people or hurt a lot of people. They go by what the law and the Constitution require. And so, just to your point, it's because of the politics kind of not meshing or being comparable with the law.
I'm sure all of us remember when Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer from New York, he stood on the steps or just below the steps of the Supreme Court, shouting that the justices, I think specifically he said, waving the fist.
I'm
Kavanaugh
shaking my fist. That's
Gorsuch.
right, for those who are only listening and not watching, because that was an important part of the visual. It was an obscene display, I think. But please go on and describe it again.
He said that the justices would reap the whirlwind of their decisions when Roe v. Wade was overturned.
And you will pay the price.
You will pay the price. And now it seems to me that some members, possibly even many members of the Democratic Party, is at least in some kind of cold war with one of the co-equal branches of government. And that's, to my mind, Scott, I'm not a constitutional scholar like yourself. That way leads to disaster, right?
Well, the thing is, they're the branch that is not capable of defending themselves because they are bound and required to act non-politically. So the Chief Justice of the United States is not going to go out and say, Schumer, you're a loser and you don't know what you're talking about and this, that, the other thing. They can't do that. That would be denigrating the politician, and they don't do that. And so what we have is the court being attacked by both senior Democrats in the legislative branch and in the executive, and they kind of can't defend themselves. And so then you sort of have a thing where the only people that seem to be defending them are people who are either on the right or, like me, hopefully, sort of in the libertarian center, if you will. And I'm not defending the work of the court necessarily, but I also think that a Johnny-come-lately political attack because of the tone of recent decisions should be called out as that and not some sort of more provocative, original attack on some sort of corruption that we see in the work of the court, which just isn't there.
Right, a not normal response from let's say, a not normal president. Scott DiCosenza, thanks ever so much.
Thanks, Mark.
And that's about all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio. My thanks to our guests, Tim Donner, Andrew Moran, Lisa K. Donner, and Scott DiCosenza, and of course to you, our listeners, for tuning in. A final thought to leave you with. In Shakespeare's Hamlet, the troubled protagonist laments the future, saying, "To grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller returns, puzzles the will, and makes us rather bear those ills we have, than fly to others that we know not of." Now, the future is indeed uncertain, but we can perhaps take comfort in knowing that it will come regardless of whatever we do. And all that remains to be dealt with is how we personally approach it, starting with the ideas of love and liberty might be a very good place to begin. Thanks for listening. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are libertynation.com.